Okay, well, welcome everybody. My name is Abe Bonowitz. I'm the director of Death Penalty Action. We're a national nonprofit organization. It works to create space and opportunities for people who want to take action to help stop executions and end the death penalty in the United States. I've been doing this work for quite some time now. More than 30 years. I was in my early 20s when I got started and got touched by this issue. And I want to share with you that I have not always opposed the death penalty. In fact, the first time I really addressed this issue as an adult, I was at a meeting of Amnesty International on the campus of Ohio State University. And I was surprised when the speaker was talking about the death penalty. I had heard about Amnesty as an organization that works to stop torture and free people who shouldn't be in prison at all. So I was, I actually confronted the speaker and said, "This is the United States, and we have the best justice system in the world. I believe in an eye for an eye, and like the Bible says, and if that includes the death penalty, then fine with me. I'll pull the switch myself." That's what I thought, and I was tolerated in that group, but I set out to try to prove them wrong. I kept going back to meetings. I wanted to work on stopping executions in places like South Africa and Russia, which, by the way, had the death penalty way back then, but don't anymore. And but I would say, this is the U.S. We were okay, and then I tried to prove those anti-death penalty people wrong. And in trying to prove them wrong, I found out that everything I believed about the death penalty, the truth was the opposite. And I had to change my mind. And I still held on to this idea that if we could make sure we always got it right, and if we could be fair about it, then okay. But I came to understand that we don't always get it right, and we are not a a fair. We don't have a fair legal system. What matters more than the severity of the crime is money and race and politics and geography, and each of those things we could talk for an hour about. But today, I'm here to um, give you some tools to finish out my story. Once I got involved with people who are murder victim family members who oppose the death penalty, and people who have survived wrongful conviction and time on death row and then been exonerated and freed, people who are the families of people who have been executed, or the families of people on death row, because whether it's death row or prison in general, when you go to prison, in many ways your family goes with you. Um, Even the people who carry out executions are part of this movement now. And it was in coming to understand how the death penalty creates circles of pain and trauma well beyond the victim and the accused killer, whether guilty or not. Um, it's those ripples that we should not be in the business of creating. And that's what the death penalty does. It creates more pain, it lengthens the pain. Um, and and it was in meeting all those kinds of people who have the firsthand knowledge. I call them voices of experience on the death penalty. We're going to hear one of those people, Sabrina Butler, during the keynote in a little while, 2:15. And I hope you go to that because her story is super powerful. But the point is that there's too many people like her and too many people who are victim family members that are told, wait till we kill the guy and then you can feel better. Um, and it's meeting people like that. I like to say the facts changed my head, and the journey of meeting all those people changed my heart. And that's how I came to oppose the death penalty. And I share that with you because it's super important to understand that on this or any other issue, number one, we have to make sure that what we believe it to be the truth is actually the truth, that we figure out how to put ourselves into the shoes and the mindset of the people that are on different, experiencing different aspects of the death penalty or whatever the issue is, so that we can understand it. We need to know how to access information about it and educate ourselves so that we can talk not just about what our motivation is, but also be able to answer questions about related motivations. For example, you don't want to talk to people about the high cost of the death penalty when they're coming at it from a faith perspective. And by the same token, you don't want to talk about what Jesus had to say about the death penalty if you're talking to somebody who's going to care about the pragmatic issues of fairness or how much we spend on it or whether we get it right or wrong. So all those things are really important to keep in mind. Okay. What's happening on the death penalty in this country right now? Well, we're about to experience a spike in executions. We've had, I think, 3 executions this calendar year. There, by the way, were 3 people scheduled to be executed this summer. All 3 of them are honorably discharged U.S. Marines before they committed their crimes after their service. One was executed at the end of June. The guy who was supposed to go in Nevada in July got a stay. We'll see what happens in that case. And on Wednesday, this coming week, is the next scheduled execution. And that's in Texas, of course. But Oklahoma's Attorney General just asked for 7 execution dates to be set. There's a man set to be executed in Missouri in the beginning of October. Texas has 7 executions scheduled through the end of this calendar year. Alabama just announced that its new gas chamber is ready to start conducting executions. So Tennessee is going to get back to it with the electric chair. South Carolina just in May instituted the firing squad, and now because their law says you have to give prisoners a choice of how they're going to be killed, and they can't figure out the drugs for lethal injection. So in addition to their electric chair, they've added the firing squad. And now they're going to ask prisoners to choose whether to be killed by firing squad or electric chair. Okay. In Alabama, we'll go back to that. There's a guy that just had his execution date set. He was to be executed in the spring. It went up to 11 p.m. or so before the Supreme Court finally ruled. The outrageousness of that case, Willie Smith, is that he had 2 appeals before the U.S. Supreme Court. One was that he didn't have the mental capacity, a high enough IQ to be executed. The other was he wanted to have his own pastor in the death chamber with him. And, and Alabama had disallowed clergy in the death chamber with the prisoner a couple of years back when a Muslim wanted to have his Muslim cleric. And of course, they weren't going to allow a Muslim in there praying. So they just said no clergy. Anyway, he appealed to say, I need to have my clergy. Supreme Court at 11 p.m. said, no, we're not going to stop the execution because of your mental capacity, but we're going to make sure that the state allows you to have your pastor in the room while they kill you. And of course, Alabama had to stop because their protocol for executions, their step-by-step guide, did not allow for carrying out, for having clergy in the room. So they had to stop, rewrite it, which they've now done, and now they've scheduled him for execution again. That's another one of the issues with John Ramirez, who's going to be executed, or maybe executed on Wednesday. He's got a lawsuit that's currently before the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals that he's basically arguing, he's got no issues in his case to argue. They're arguing that he should be allowed to have his pastor in the room, and they want to do this hands-on thing that some Christians do, hands-on prayer. So that's what they're arguing. We'll see if that has enough legs to gum up the works and stop the execution for a bit. But at the end of the day, it's not how we kill our prisoners. It's that we do so when the system is as broken as it is. And we're at a space in the history of this movement and this issue where if you don't have issues to litigate in your case specifically, then we're running out of things like the method of execution or this question of who's praying for you and where they are and if they can speak out loud during the execution. And that's why I say we're about to have a spike, because that's the other thing that's really slowed us down, of course, is the pandemic. And they're figuring out that, yes, we can go ahead and have executions even in light of the pandemic, and that's starting to happen. Now, the other thing that's going on is in some states, like Ohio is the only one that's left standing this year, but we had bills to abolish the death penalty pass the legislature in Wyoming, and it passed one body of the legislature in Wyoming and Nevada this year. In Virginia, the state of Virginia, which had more than 1,000 executions since Virginia was a colony, all the way up until today. Virginia became the first Confederate state to legislatively repeal its death penalty. And they did that because of a whole lot of people like you and me taking action. And that's what this is all about. So we've had some states. Now Ohio is still left, and we think and the amazing thing is when you give it to conservatives and give them conservative arguments to make, the conservatives are leading on this issue in Ohio, and anything that's going to pass in Ohio, because the Republican Party dominates the House, the Senate, and they have the governorship, so you can't get anything done without Republicans. Well, guess what? They're leading it, and we think we're going to be able to abolish the death penalty maybe even this year, or certainly this legislative session, which in Ohio goes until December of next year. So, especially if you're in Ohio, there's something to do. But no matter where you live, in the United States or elsewhere, there's something to do. And that's what Death Penalty Action is all about. Now, last year, also at this time, we were in the midst of a federal execution spree, which the Trump administration was doing. They started in July and they went all the way into January. The last 6 months of the Trump administration, there were 13, an unprecedented 13 federal executions in the space of 6 months. Thank God that's over. But what we've come out of that with is legislation. The Federal Death Penalty Prohibition Act of 2021 and Rehumanize International is a partner in the campaign to do this. And yes, we're going to have, Kara, we're going to have access to these videos. In fact, I'm going to show you one in just a minute here. So the point is that that's happening now. We've got federal legislation to work on it. So even if you live in a state that doesn't have a death penalty as a state, is still under by the federal government, and you still need to be contacting your federal, your U.S. members of Congress, your senators, and your representative. And if you live outside the United States, there's stuff for you to do too. We all get to educate and make sure people understand about these issues, but you can sign most of the petitions that we have on our webpage. And also, if you live outside the United States, write a handwritten note to the ambassador from the United States to your country and send it to the U.S. Embassy or the consulate, whatever it is. Engage the people that are representing the U.S. officially in your country, and just engage them in dialogue. Ask them to take it back. So there's that. I'm going to see if I can share my screen. I want to share a short video. I'm going to show you a couple of other things, and then hopefully there'll be some time for Q&A. Okay. Tell me in the chat if this is working. Let's see here. All right. Oh, well, I can't see the chat now, but I want to show this video. And
it's working, just letting you know.
Oh, it is working. Yes?
Yes, it's working.
Okay, and I'm going to play this. Just tell me quickly when the sound starts, if the sound is working too.
The death penalty is cruel, unjust, and has no place in any society.
There's a slight echo, but yes, it's a. So you might have to mute yourself.
It's a deadly pandemic that took countless lives. The Trump administration resumed federal executions for the first time in 17 years. What followed was an unprecedented state-sanctioned killing spree, unlike anything we've ever seen in this country. In only 7 months, the Trump administration executed 13 people. That's more than the total number executed over the previous 6 decades. A horrible and ruthless legacy to leave. In Trump, we saw the worst example of what a change in power could bring, which is why it is essential that Congress legislate to fully end the death penalty, codify its abolishment into law, and prevent a future president from reinstating it down the line. State-sanctioned murder is not justice, and the death penalty goes against everything we claim to stand for as a nation. And at a time when more states across the country have outlawed the death penalty than ever before, more Americans oppose the death penalty, and over 70% of nations across the globe have abolished it. We must follow suit and do what's right. Death penalty action is calling on members of Congress to pass my Federal Death Penalty Prohibition Act of 2021 to abolish the federal and military death penalty once and for all. It's what the people want. It's what the nation needs. And it's what we must do.
Make sure to unmute yourself now. Oh, you're still muted right now. There should be the. Oh, there you go. There you go.
There was a button on top of my mute button, so I had to wait. So you're able to hear that video, right?
Yes, it sounded good on my end.
Okay, great. So that was Representative Ayanna Pressley. She's the bill sponsor in the House of Representatives. That was her voice that we were hearing in the video. She introduced that legislation. Also, Representative Adriano Espaillat has a similar bill. The only main difference is that his gets into nitty gritty and hers just says get rid of it. And in the Senate, Senator Durbin is the co-sponsor or the sponsor there. And we have more than 100 members of Congress so far are co-sponsors, including in the House a Republican, and that's what we're working on right now, just to be ready for when, because there's so much energy being sucked up in Congress on all these much bigger, broader issues, the war and Afghanistan and the climate disasters and all the other things that they're doing. But we want to be ready when it's time to take up the death penalty. And therefore, that's what everybody is asked to do, is write to your members of Congress, make sure you're registered with them, what your opinion is, and that you want them to vote to abolish the death penalty. And then we get to do the same thing at the state level. I'm going to show you a couple other things. I'm going to share my screen again and just show you some of the other resources, and then we'll have a couple minutes for questions. So let's see here. Well, first I'm going to show you. Oh, that's us, right? Look at that. Let's see. Are you seeing this? It says Tikkun at the top.
No, I'm still seeing the hop-in screen right now.
Okay, yeah. So this is just something that went live yesterday. This is a Jewish cantor who leads prayers in a Jewish synagogue. But here he is.
Sorry, I can't see it.
What's that?
We can't see it. It's still showing the hop-in screen right now.
Oh, I see.
You might have to exit and select the other tab. I believe if you have it open in a tab on your browser.
Yeah, how's that?
Yes, I can see it now. Great.
Okay, so I'm showing you this just because it's timely. Starting on Monday evening is Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish New Year. And so Tikkun magazine is online, put this up, and you can read this here. But the key thing is here's a little bit about what the Jewish perspective is on the death penalty. But then there's this whole list of things to do. And I show this to you because it's the sort of thing that you can do. Is there a newspaper at your school, in your community, a community or a club that you're a part of that can create something like this to put different kinds of ways for people to take action? That's what we're talking about, is how do you be imaginative and in a way that allows you to help spread the word, right? And that's what Death Penalty Action's website is all set up to do. There's a little bit of a hiccup today because we're doing some streamlining as to the slider that's here. But once you scroll down, here's the video I just showed you, and then our featured actions. We have, among other things, this is a tool right here to send a letter to your members of Congress. Let's see here. There we go. There's an action. I'm not going to click on all of them, to sign a petition asking the Attorney General not to seek death in new cases, new federal cases. And then we've got there's this a petition about the gas chamber being used in Arizona and Oklahoma and Alabama. This is a new thing. We haven't used a gas chamber in decades in this country, and now they're trying to start that back up. In some states with a new form of it using nitrogen hypoxia, but in Arizona, they're still using cyanide gas, which is horrific. And if you go to this petition, you can read some depositions about what that looks like. I mentioned South Carolina, where they just started, they introduced the firing squad. So we went down to South Carolina and did some rallies. This man in the red shirt here is Charles Keith. His brother was on death row, and he successfully advocated to get his sentence commuted. He's still working to prove his innocence and get him freed. But Charles is our impacted communities liaison, as the family member of somebody in prison and also a murder victim family member. So we went down there to talk to them, and then they said, "Hey, will you help us start a group?" And that's what we did this summer. We created South Carolinians for Alternatives to the Death Penalty. So there's a link to that. There's a couple other things here. We do start to consider, these extrajudicial executions, that people being killed by the police and other government agents without going through a judicial process. We want to make sure there's conversation about that. This is the biggest case you're going to be hearing about right now, the Justice for Julius Jones case in Oklahoma. He's scheduled, they've asked for a date for October 28th. And on October 5th, he's going to have a clemency hearing, but he was supposed to have a hearing a week from Monday where he was going to lay out all the evidence of his innocence. So they've got a guy they're getting ready to execute who actually can show his innocence. And this is a petition that people can sign. And then below this is just some more resources for people that are Christian and Catholic, resources for people that are Jewish. You can click here to see our newsletter, et cetera, et cetera. I want to also show you under the Take Action, we have execution petitions, and this has suddenly burst wide open in terms of all these executions that are scheduled and pending. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 so far. And we're asking people to sign each of these petitions. When somebody has an execution scheduled and they get into it, and then it gets postponed, as these ones here in Texas did, and also this one in Tennessee. And I mentioned Willie Smith. We need to move that one up. I'm going to remind my web designer to do that. These here were postponed due to COVID, so they just pushed them back a little bit, but they're going to get another case. Here's another Purvis Payne in Tennessee. There's another innocent guy who actually just changed the law to allow him to bring in not his innocence information, but the fact of his mental capacity, his low IQ. So there's all these different kinds of actions, and it's all here on our webpage, things for people to do. And then, when you do, you end up on our newsletter, on our email list, and we continually, we don't try to spam people, but we make sure that when there's something happening, that it's an opportunity for people to take action. That's the key thing. There's other organizations too. There's the Catholic Mobilizing Network. There's Witness to Innocence. There's the Innocence Project. Most state organizations, and most states that have a death penalty have a state organization. We encourage you to get involved with them. Just Google the name of your state and death penalty, and if there's a group there, it should be within the answers there that you get. I didn't point it out, but on the webpage, there's a tab for merch, and that's where you can go and get t-shirts like this one. And you've got masks, and they've got some good anti-death penalty stuff also on the Rehumanize International page. So you could check them out too and get some good stuff. And it's important to do that, number one, because it helps spread the message. And even if somebody doesn't say anything, they're seeing it, they're registering with it. And it takes a minimum of 7 impressions of an idea or a concept for people to start remembering it. So if you're regularly make it a goal to wear an anti-death penalty shirt or whatever your cause is, at least once a week, right? I wear it all the time. So I'm known as the death penalty guy, like in the grocery store. Some cashier had her her kid had a report on the death penalty, and she was waiting for me to come so she could get my phone number and give her kid my number to call me about his report on the death penalty. Right? It's becoming a person who's a resource for information and action on whatever your issue is. For me, it's the death penalty. So we've got different ways that you can become a walking billboard or otherwise. You see this sign. There it is up here. A bunch of different signs that are available too. And you saw what we're up to in those in the scenes in the video. That doesn't take a huge crowd, and we rarely get a very big crowd on this issue. But it doesn't take a huge crowd to be able to create a presence and to be heard and to be felt. And if the media comes, then they'll cover you and they show pictures of your signs and you get your messages out. We call that earned media, and because you don't have to pay for it. In fact, you can't get on the front page of the newspaper with an ad, but maybe you get on the front page or in the newspaper with your picture. And that's what we've become really good at. Pictures of our actions end up illustrating news items about totally unrelated things. It's usually a picture of a accused murderer or a gurney for lethal injection, or a picture of people taking action. More often than not, it's one of our actions that we help manage. So if there's questions, put them in the thanks, Herb, for the warning. Put your questions in here real quick. And of course, I'm available at any point at abe@deathpenaltyaction.org. And, the key thing is just to know that this is happening, to let people know that it's happening, to give them tools to take action, and to be an example. Be the example of what can I do with a little bit of time and a little bit of effort to make a difference. Is there a legal possibility of a federal prohibition on the death penalty? And by that, I mean the state. The only federal entity that can stop state level executions is the U.S. Supreme Court. And the way that works is people have to file a motion or an appeal and get the Supreme Court to decide that they want to actually hear that. And then that stops everything until they go through the process and make their decision. The federal government cannot force, other than the Supreme Court, the federal government can't force states to stop executions. What they can do is stop federal prosecutions, and we've already got a commitment, at least from this president, that there will be no federal executions, and he's going to work towards abolishing the federal death penalty and the military death penalty. If you were in the session on torture in Guantanamo before, we heard that speaker talking about how he was threatened with the death penalty, and we're going to put a stop to that with the federal legislation. But Joe Biden can only sign a bill if we get it through Congress and get it to him. And that's why we all need to be in contact with our own state representatives. What other questions do we have? We're coming up on 1:29, and I'm bringing it home right on time, Herb, as promised. So, I can hang out as long as you want to keep the session open. But if there's more questions, otherwise we can go get a break and see you at the next session, and at 2:15 when Sabrina is on the main stage.